Hello, welcome to this Friday afternoon session. I know it's late. It's been a long conference week, a lot of sessions. So I really appreciate your time that you're here. And yeah, it's quite hard to do such a geeky topic like schema updates on a Friday afternoon. So I really appreciate that you guys are here. So I want to talk about schema updates, how to do it, or actually how I put it, how to do it the right way. The session is at level 400 at TechEd, so that means we are using some technical terms here. You all have an understanding of Active Directory. Probably most of you guys are working with Active Directory because otherwise you wouldn't be interested in updating your schema. My name is Ulf Simon Wiedner. Sorry, I forgot. I'm senior consultant in Germany, as you can hear, and I'm working with major customers down there. I'm also MVP on Windows Server Directory Services and get to write sometimes articles and or I published a couple books and also get to speak at various conferences such as the Directory Experts Conference, where we also had the same session this year. We have 5 areas in the identity and access management, and you've seen probably sessions in all those 5 areas. Today, we majorly cover Active Directory domain services, but we will also touch Active Directory lightweight directory services, formerly called as ADAM. And updating the schema is also always a topic when we talk about identity integration, when we talk about Identity Lifecycle Manager or MIS. Because if you want to put data from Active Directory into different other directories or vice versa, you might have to extend your schema with proper attributes. So here's the agenda. First, I want to discuss when do we store data in AD, or do we have perhaps other possibilities? What do I need to know before we extend our schema? Then I talk about extending versus what I call configuring your schema, because we had some misunderstandings in the past, and I just want to make clear what kind of schema updates are really dangerous and what things are basically schema configurations. Then we have a bigger part with a couple demos where I talk about evaluating the schema. We are talking about testing, rolling out, and especially administrating schema extensions as well. And I also want to come up with some best practices, and some of them are actually currently not known and not very well documented. They have been presented at the Directory Experts Conference, as I said, but otherwise you won't find any information about those best practices, especially when it comes together extending your Active Directory schema for exchange for having additional things there. Actually, we've done a schema update recently at our company. We've done the schema update to introduce Windows Server 2008 in our domain. And our management was very anxious to do this. And yeah, we had to do the usual things like testing, like writing risk documents, writing rollback strategies. And so it's always a lot of paperwork. Customers are, multiple times, they are kind of scared when it comes to extending your schema because you can basically ruin your Active Directory if you do it wrong. But they are not this dangerous, and I hope after you are leaving the session, you agree with me that if you do it right, there's no risk in extending your schema. And actually, just let me add to this point, we also were deploying our first Windows Server 2008 domain controllers, and this happened a couple of weeks ago, and our main administrator, who's responsible for this, is here at the conference. They wouldn't have let him go if there were any risks there. So we are fine, we extended the schema, it's working. Okay, let's go on. Schema extension, yes or no? And we have 2 points here. First, which data is not good or good for extending the schema? Because we might not have all the data what we want to store in some kind of directory. We might not have the appropriate data. And do we have alternatives? Where can we store the data alternatively? So the first thing to evaluate when designing a schema extension is maybe I have existing attributes. For example, there are attributes like drink or employee ID already in the schema, and there are a lot of attributes. employee ID is not used, and many are not used from the base administrative interfaces. And many companies want to store the employee ID of their employees in Active Directory. So they don't actually need to extend the schema. They just have to figure out how to administer the employee ID. And this actually got even easier with Windows Server 2008, as I will show you later. The other thing is it the right kind of data in Active Directory? Brian Poole had a Shark Talk earlier this week where he told us that Microsoft decided to put employee pictures in Active Directory. And I actually questioned him in this Shark Talk if Active Directory would be the right place to store the picture. We were talking about it afterwards, and now I agree, yes, it's the right place, because they want to use this kind of data from every client. So they have a little extension for Outlook, and they are able to see the employee pictures right in Outlook. So we need the data actually everywhere. And then we have, with Active Directory, a very distributed database, which is good in replication and stuff like this. So this might be the right place to put this kind of data. On the other hand, if I have a web application, which would run centrally in my data center, and the web application is the one which is providing me with employee pictures, then I really don't want to have all this binary data in Active Directory and replicating out to my hub offices where it's not used. Same example counts for like voice over IP. Many companies are going to voice over IP or have gone in the past or are thinking about it. And voice over IP projects are sometimes also extending the schema. And there's the question, where are my servers who are accessing this data? Are the servers in the hub data center, or are they distributed? Or are the clients accessing the data? And so I need the data distributed. So I always have to think about what kind of data, which amount of data do I put there? Where does it have to replicate? Do I have to attach it to the user objects, or those considerations? And we'll go a little bit further in this later. Okay, one alternative we have for storing the data would be Active Directory, or not alternative, sorry. When do I integrate the application into Active Directory? First point always is it supported by the application vendor? Most applications today which integrate into some directory are also supported to integrate into Active Directory, but I have to check with the application vendor if he's supporting me to put the data into Active Directory. The next thing here is, does it extend the schema really? Or otherwise, is the schema extension, if it's extending the schema, is the schema extension well done? I never put third-party schema extensions into my Active Directory. But because what I've seen at customers is, there was actually one case in the news group once, where a customer was extending his schema by a third-party company, and this was preventing him from updating to a newer Microsoft OS later. And I will tell you what they did to solve this. But usually this means that you have to do a forest migration into a new forest, because you can't just get rid of the schema if there are major issues in there. So I'm always looking at third-party schema extensions if they are well done. And I hope that after the session you know what parts to look after, and tell your third-party vendor what to do that their schema is well done, or when to decline to put this data into Active Directory. For example, I had another application which a company wanted to integrate into Active Directory, and I was looking at them very, very closely, and they were using very generic names. I couldn't validate where their object identifier was coming from, and so it wasn't the best idea to put this kind of risky data in Active Directory. So we actually decided to put this data into a third-party directory, because the vendor didn't even support Adam at this point. We'll talk a little bit more about prefixes, namings, OIDs, link IDs, and MAPI IDs during this talk here. So those are actually the points you have to look for, and I will explain this a little bit later. And the next thing about application integration in Active Directory is that the replication scope is appropriate. Like I said, putting all Microsoft faces in their Active Directory is an appropriate place if you have a client application which is accessing it decentralized, If you want to keep those data somewhere in a central store, just in your central data center, then it might be a better idea to create your custom attributes, to create your custom objects there and link them somehow, and to put those in an application partition. Because in Active Directory, since Windows Server 2003, we have this concept of application partitions where we can select which domain controllers should receive a copy of this data. And this is actually done by default using DNS, as most of you are probably aware. Like in DNS, we can select to replicate the data only to domain controllers, which also hold the DNS server role, and only to those either within the domain or within the forest, depending on which replication scope I choose. And my Active Directory domain controllers who are not holding the DNS server role will never receive this data. And I can also use the same mechanism for my own custom schema extensions. Okay, one alternative to put the data in Active Directory domain services, as we call it with Windows Server 2008, would be using Active Directory lightweight domain services, which was the thing formerly known as ADAM. ADAM is great for developing application, testing applications against directory service like Active Directory, and it provides you with most of the benefits of Active Directory. You can't store your computer accounts in there, and your computer accounts can't authenticate against ADAM. However, you can put custom user accounts in there, which might be the appropriate place for external customers, whatever, people you don't want to have in your internal Active Directory, or you can even configure ADLDS to forward logon requests to a domain controller, so you don't have to duplicate user accounts there. You can simply forward them. What's very nice about ADLDS is that it has a free replication scope, so you can configure which servers should receive a copy of your partition here. And another thing is that it runs on every version since Windows XP. So on Windows XP or Server 2003, you can download it and install it. On Windows Server 2003 R2, it's integrated in the component installation. And in Windows Server 2008, it's integrated in the roles. So if you go in Server Manager in Windows Server 2008, you can simply select Active Directory lightweight domain services as a role. Another thing I want to mention about ADLDS is the schema. You can have a different schema for each partition there, and since you are able to configure those partitions where they replicate, you are also able to install multiple instances, and you have a custom schema, so you're very flexible here. So when do I integrate application into ADLDS? Same thing again. Is it supported by the application vendor? And as I said before, the application we had this customer was supported against Active Directory, but it was not supported by the vendor against ADLDS or ADAM. So we had an issue there because larger companies rely on their application vendor giving them support. So we told actually the application vendor that they need to update their application and their support strategy. And if they are supporting ADLDS or ADAM, we will put this application again, and we will configure this application that it's running against ADAM. And if they clean up their, let's call it dirty schema extensions, then we can put them right into our Active Directory. The schema, like I just said, who cares? We get our own schema. We get our own schema per ADLDS configuration set. So yeah, we can configure multiple schemas actually on one machine, and we can select that this one configuration set is replicating with those DCs or with those other ADAM servers here, and we have a different configuration set which is replicating with other servers. So we are highly flexible to our replication scope and to the schema. Okay, so what do I need to know before I'm extending my schema? We have different components there, and let me step down. So this slide here is not level 400, but only that we are all aware of the terms here. In Active Directory, we have classes and we have attributes. Let me make an example. For example, if I want to put a car in my Active Directory, the car would be a class. So, or the definition of a car would be a class. On the other hand, we have attributes, and we know all that a car has a number of wheels, it has a number of doors, it has a color. So I can configure attributes like configuring doors, that it will be a number, configuring color, that it will be perhaps a 3-digit alphanumerical color code. I can configure doors, will be a number again. The blade will be a string, which has a couple more letters. So I have actually like the same thing what you do when you define a table in SQL or Access. You have to configure what format the data has, which is in there. And those, like the columns in SQL or in Access, those are in Active Directory the attributes. And on the other hand, we have the classes, which would compare to a table in Active Directory. And we also have instances of a class. So those are actually, for example, the user object, or that's a real car. So I can actually make a car and I can name it Ulf's car, and then I configure it that it has 5 doors and that it has a license plate of XYZ, whatever. So I'm filling the data in there. That's done in the object itself, but how the object looks is defined in the schema. I also have auxiliary classes, which are there to extend a class. For example, if I put a trailer on my car, I could extend my car with a class trailer, and then I can configure in the class trailer how many wheels are on the trailer, if it's where's the door of the trailer, stuff like this. We have dynamic auxiliary classes, and that's a new concept since Windows Server 2003. Who in here is aware of dynamic auxiliary classes? Okay, very rare people. Dynamic auxiliary classes are pretty cool actually, because auxiliary classes always map, like I can always configure a trailer to a car, and then every car is configured to have a trailer, and I would be able to set a Boolean value on the trailer or whatever. However, when I'm doing auxiliary classes, I'm updating all my, for example, I'm updating my class user, that every user in my whole enterprise would be able to have those additional attributes which are defined in the auxiliary class. Using dynamic auxiliary classes, and that's actually done in the inet.org person, using the dynamic auxiliary classes, I can define that certain users should be extended with the additional attributes, while other users don't get extended with those attributes. So for example, I have a shoe number, what I just can configure on certain users, or whatever example we want here. Or one popular example would be a fax solution. Fax solutions, there are many fax solutions out there for your enterprise which require you to update your schema. And this might not be the worst solution. However, I've seen companies who are running multiple domains. They have different fax solutions because those domains are highly maintained locally, or they are different corporations, but all within the same, however, concern. And there it might not be the best idea to implement a fax solution which is integrating itself into Active Directory. However, using dynamic auxiliary classes, you would be able to configure which users should use fax solution A and which of the user accounts should use fax solution B. And you don't have to configure it globally in the Active Directory schema for all users, that all are that all users need to use fax solution A, for example. I'm not sure if the vendors are supporting this yet. However, the possibility in Active Directory is there, and maybe it might be interesting for your company to use those. We also have certain values like the names in Active Directory. What we really need to make sure that they are unique, like OIDs and like link IDs. Usually we are making names unique by prefixing them. For example, if you were browsing through a user attribute, you've probably seen attributes like MSD, S minus, whatever. So those are registered by Microsoft. Only Microsoft is using MSD, S minus in front of their names. And there was a possibility to register those names with Microsoft, but this process has recently changed, and I'm telling you a little bit more about this later. Now it's later. Yeah, names should always begin with a prefix. And I, for example, registered this USWC prefix once with Microsoft. And you really need to make sure that a name, what you put in Active Directory, is only used once. If you're extending your schema with something like shoe size without a prefix, you might get issues if you want to upgrade your Windows operating system and Microsoft thinks at one point that shoe size might be important for every company, or if other companies are coming and they are not using prefixes, it might be that they are using the same name. However, names in Active Directory, in the Active Directory schema, need to be unique. So it's very important that you use a prefix here, what no other company would use. And like I said, in the past, you were able to register prefixes with Microsoft. However, Microsoft has decided that they don't want to be authoritative for all names and everything. So we don't have a central store where we can register anything anymore. And so you need to make sure whatever you are using, that it will be unique. For example, use your DNS name. Make it Microsoft -com minus or Microsoft com in one word and then minus my shoe size. Make sure that the names are very, very unlikely to conflict with other schema updates you might expect in the future. Those things here are kind of time bombs, because you might be fine extending your schema today, but you never know what's happening when you want to integrate some other schema extension, when Microsoft is coming out with a new schema or something. So make sure that the names are unique and matched to your company name or anything like that. OIDs, those are the long numbers what we see down here. OIDs also need to be unique, and we need OIDs when, for example, working with certificate services, but we also need to use them when we are working with schemas. So OID is actually a very long number with a couple dots in between there, and usually you should get your own root OID and then maintain the OID namespace underneath in your company. And it's very important there too that you make sure that each OID is only used once, and that it's registered to you, or that it's very unlikely that somebody else is using it. Because if it's not unique, we get exactly the same issues than with names. And one best practice here is that you use your root OID. This text here is actually coming out of an email from Microsoft, and I will show you how to get this email later, which is giving you some best practices on extending the schema. And I believe that those informations will be also available on the website of Microsoft.com in the close future. But right now, it's within an email you can get from Microsoft. It's in the TechNet Script Center mentioned. And as we see down here, let me put an arrow here. Okay, as we see here, this is our root OID. And we do here, for example, a .1 at the end for classes, and then number the classes 1.1, 1.2, and so on. And we have to make sure that we have some authoritative Excel sheet or whatever you use in our corporation, that everybody who wants to extend or would be allowed to extend the schema is aware of a process, how to register this number to be unique within your organization. So you need to assign somebody for the process of giving out those OIDs. And the best practice further says that then you are doing .2, for example, at the end, and then you use 2.1 and 2.2 and so on for the next attributes, so that you make sure you can extend those with as many dots as you like. I'm not sure if there's a delimiter. Probably there's some technical one, but it's pretty at the end. And then another thing are link IDs, and I will actually speak about link IDs a little bit later, but those are also one of the values which need to be unique. So you can get an OID. For example, IANA is registering OIDs, and you can simply apply there for an OID, and you get an OID, and there's a website which is actually mapping the OID back to your corporation and to who is responsible for maintaining this OID. So I think if you do this professionally, if you want to make software what you're distributing to other companies, then get an OID from IANA, or maybe check in your company. Many companies already have OIDs for certain reasons. Another possibility would be to use a new process from Microsoft, which is generating a random OID underneath a Microsoft namespace, which is reserved for customer OIDs. And what they are basically doing there is they are creating a random GUID. GUID, as the name says, is global unique identifier. So it's very, very unlikely that somebody is matching the same GUID. And then they are simply converting this GUID into a number, and they are putting this underneath the root OID namespace they have for their customers. So that's another process, and I will show you this in a moment. Prefix and link IDs, you were able to get them earlier from Microsoft. Prefixes, as I said, the process has changed here. They don't provide you with prefixes anymore. You can't register them. So make sure you use something else you registered, like your DNS name. Link IDs, there's a better process using auto-link IDs, which is not very well covered on the internet, but it is covered, and it is covered in a couple slides later. And if you are unable, or if you would be able to use auto-link IDs, there's still a process for getting one. So if you're in Windows 2000 mode, you can't use auto-link IDs, then you would be able to register them with Microsoft. However, the preferred thing here is using auto-link IDs, what we will cover in a moment. So I said the process here has changed, and actually the URL we had before was pointing you to this schemreg@microsoft.com email address that you can send your request there to get a prefix and to get an OID. But as I said, the process has changed, and let me show you the email. This is the email you get back from them. We no longer provide registration lookups of OIDs and link IDs, and actually you just need to write an email to this schemreg@microsoft.com email address, which is outlined in the slides, and you get a lot of valuable information actually here. How to generate OID, they are referring you to a script which is doing the GUID to OID conversion. It's strongly recommended that you prefix your custom schema extensions with classes with the name of your organization. So there's information there which is already pointing you that you should make sure that your names are unique, and so on. And here you also get the information how the best practices are to create your own number namespace underneath the OID root you are generating yourself. And then they are also talking about link IDs. So you can I will cover this later in the slides, but this email is giving a lot of valuable information. For example, how to do those link IDs here automatically too, and so on. Okay. The VB script to generate OIDs is pretty simple. I can show this actually to you here. I've changed my command prompt to a $sign again because Mark Minasi told me I will get $10,000 more a year when I'm working Unix-like. So C script, and I have the OID gen script here, which is in the TechNet script center, and what you will also be linked to in the email I just showed you. And this one is also giving you a lot of information, but the thing we are looking for here is the root OID. And you see it's creating a very long root OID. And if we actually look at the script, here we see that they are simply, here they are generating a GUID. So they have a string GUID, and then they are converting this quite easily to a longer number. And so since GUIDs are supposed to be globally unique, and they attach this number underneath Microsoft's root namespace. Where is it? Oop. Higher? Here we go. Thank you. Here we have the root namespace, what they assigned to their customers, and then they put the GUID conversion underneath. So it's very, very likely that this number is unique, and this should be okay for custom schema extensions. But if you deploy schema extensions to other companies or something, then please register OID with IANA, because that's more secure to have a single authority taking care of this. I keep this window open here because we need our OID in a moment. Okay, yeah, as I said, link IDs will take care of this in a moment. To verify third-party extensions, really make sure to check the prefixes, make sure that they are matching their company. Check OIDs, that they are using OIDs which are somewhere registered or that they are globally unique if there need to be, but preference is here that they are using OIDs which are registered back to them. The schema extension I told you before from some application, they were using a OID namespace, what I was searching on the internet for, and I found some information that this was assigned to one company, but the one company declined that it was assigned to them, and so nobody knew where this OID namespace was assigned to. And usually you should find those informations on the internet. So if you don't find anything about it, rather talk to your application vendor where they have designed their OIDs, because you don't want to have conflicting OIDs in your Active Directory, or you can't have them. So that's quite easy. You are prevented from updating your Active Directory if you have conflicting OIDs in a schema update. MAPI IDs are used if you, for example, if you want to extend your schema and you want to make your attributes available in the global address book of Outlook, then it's necessary that you assign them a MAPI ID. And the MAPI ID also needs to be unique. However, in the past, there was no possibility to figure out what MAPI ID you can use, which one is never used by Microsoft or some other company in the future. There was no process of registering them, and there was no reserved namespace. However, this has changed in Windows Server 2008, and I will cover this in a moment, how to do those. So let's look what we have to do when we want to create an attribute. First thing, as always, get an OID, get a prefix. GUID, you can help yourself here. Developers actually recommend that you use GUIDs which are always unique, so that you're using the same GUID across with your schema updates across certain forests, across your test environment, production environment, other forests you might have, or if you're application vendor, that you use those GUIDs even in the forests of other companies. So what you can actually do to create a GUID, and that's the way I do it, is that I'm creating the schema update in my test environment or development environment, and I'm not assigning a static GUID at this point, but then I'm dumping the schema configuration out in an LDIF file, simply by using ldif-de-f into a file with the object in question. And then I can use this LDIF file to update my other forests after I was testing everything well, after I'm sure that my application is working, and so on. You need to know the format of the attribute, if it's a case-sensitive or not case-sensitive string, integer, Unicode, Boolean, and so on. You are able to configure a minimum and maximum length. However, there are two things to consider. One is that's not really non-reversible. You can always change the maximum and minimum length. The other thing is that international characters might end up in 2 bytes. And if you have 2 bytes in there, then you have to count, you have to allow them additional space. At one customer where I did a schema extension, they were using international characters in there, and they said this string always is 5 digits. However, since they were using international characters in there, we had to give them a little bit more allowance, and we weren't able to configure the maximum length of the attribute with 5 bytes here. Then we have link IDs and MAPI IDs. Link IDs are relationships such as member, member of. We covered this in my Active Directory session 2 days ago, and it's also applies to applied when we have password settings objects or direct reports manager. Those things are the best example here is the member and member of groups. Only the member, which is the forward link, is the writable one. The backward link is not writable. But we have to configure in Active Directory this relationship between the member, which is configured in the group, and the member of, which is just a viewable attribute, a calculated attribute, and this is the backlink. And those link IDs always are unique in your Active Directory as well. So it's important that you are using unique link IDs here, and there's a process of automatically generating them when you update your Active Directory. And MAPI IDs, as I just said, they are there to see user attributes in the Outlook address field, in the global address list, and so on. Then you have to assign those values a MAPI ID. And using Windows 2000 or Windows Server 2003, you really have issues there. So if you don't need to, if it's not absolutely necessary to put them in there, I would stick away from it in Windows Server 2000 and Windows Server 2003 and wait until you get your domain to Windows Server 2008 or your first domain controllers, because then you can run against these domain controllers for the schema update. And Windows Server 2008 provides you with the possibility to automatically generate a MAPI ID. Also, when you're evaluating third-party schema extensions, look for those values, for the names, for the OIDs, for the link IDs, and for the MAPI IDs. Because if you do it wrong, if they don't register those, if they don't use the automatic mechanisms to do those, then you might end up with a schema what you can't extend in one point in the future. When you create an attribute, you also can configure the search flags as maximum and minimum. The search flags are also something you can change later. And example, the search flag is a binary attribute, which is adding up. There's one flag for that it's replicated in the global catalog server via the partial attribute set, or if it's indexed, or if it's providing a tuple index. Tuple index is something you need if you want to do searches like star star F for all names which are ending with a F, or star whatever. So for example, in Germany we have the zip code up front. Zip code is searchable, okay, bad thing again. We would be able to search for star street or whatever, and we can do those only on with a higher performance if we have a tuple index on this attribute. We have arrow pass. You heard a little bit about read-only domain controllers in the past week, and arrow pass is the flag you set if you don't want this attribute to replicate in the read-only domain controllers. However, this is a little bit dangerous too, because that's one of the very rare reasons where an application needs to be aware of the concept of read-only domain controllers. You can also configure if some values remain in the tombstone. So if you're deleting them, they are still replicating out there. This is not valid for links, but it's valid for other things. And oh, who in here heard about ANR? Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, couple people. ANR is actually an interesting concept too. When you search for names in Active Directory and you are not specific if you're searching for a first name or a last name or an email or something, you can simply put in the field there, in the generic search field, you can type in a name there, for example, Simon, and ANR, in biggest name resolution, takes care of searching certain attributes. So it's actually performing a search against given name, first name, surname, email addresses, those likely attributes. And a search against Simon would provide you with somebody whose first name is Simon and, for example, me, because my last name contains Simon. So ANR is a set of attributes which are being searched when you do generic name searches in Active Directory. If you're creating your own search filter, you can simply configure it to use ANR equals something, and then it will search against all those attributes which are configured in the ambiguous name resolution set. Okay, that's a little bit technical actually for this talk. So what data do I need? We were just talking about the data I need to create an object, but there's also data I need to create. We were just talking about attributes, now we are talking about objects. So objects is the same thing again with name, OID, prefixes, and the GUID. We don't have link IDs and MAPI IDs on objects, but we have them in the attributes. But we have different types of an object. For example, we have structural objects, which are the generic ones like users, computers, the ones we usually use. But when we extend our schema, we are very likely that we want to extend a user with certain email attributes which are not in the default schema, or certain fax settings which are not in the default schema. So what we usually do is that we put those attributes in an auxiliary class, and this auxiliary class is an extension to my definition of a user, and then I can configure this auxiliary class to be attached to a user attribute. So I don't extend the original user class, which would be a structural attribute, structural object. I'm just extending my auxiliary class and then map the auxiliary class to the structural class of user. And we also have to configure with what attributes we must contain and which attributes we may contain here. So must contain are those, you have to be very careful if you configure something with must contain. Must contain means that this attribute needs to be filled upon creation of the object. So if you configure, for example, shoe size as must contain of your users, you have to make sure that every administrative interface, what your administrators are using to create a user, is also including the shoe size attribute, because otherwise the creation of this user will fail. You need to fill this in upon creation. So I highly recommend not using the must contain values unless you're very, very sure what you're doing there, because you have to extend, for example, the object creation interface in Active Directory users in computer. This is possible, but it's a lot of work. So I'd rather use may contain and then use some other processes to fill those things. May contain is they might be there, they don't have to be filled upon creation of the object. Oops, sorry, a little bit too fast. So adding attributes to existing object is that we can do it directly. Let me show you the schema management console here, let me show you the schema management console. Actually, what you have to do before you go into the schema management console, you have to register it. So I have to do reg svr32 schmmgmt.dll. Okay, registration succeeded. I'm always registering it when I need to go into the console. When I'm done with my schema, whatever views I do there, because I actually don't like it for updates, I prefer to do those via programs or LDIF files. But this is a nice view of the schema. But afterwards, I'm deregistering it, just making sure that I'm not using it accidentally or someone else. So let's open up the management console. Are you able to see the font in the back? Okay, thank you. Add remove snap-in. And now we added here the Active Directory Schema Management Console. This wouldn't be there if you wouldn't run the reg svr command and register the Schema Management Console. We are adding this, okay. And now let's look into the user class. So here we got my user. It's a structural class, as I assumed. Yeah, it's one of my main objects I'm using, and it's active. And let's look in here. Here the user contains a name, OID. So that's one of Microsoft OIDs here, and it's the type structural. And now I can look at the relationship. As you probably know, all objects in Active Directory are inheriting from somewhere. If they are plain new objects, they are inheriting from top. If they do have more information, if they are more specific, for example, than a person, then they might inherit from person. And user is one of the examples here, which is inheriting from organizational person. So there are contacts, there are computers, which are very alike, and all those are somewhere inheriting from person, and user here is more specific. And a user has additional, those auxiliary classes here for mail recipient, ignore this one, this is one of my demos, POSIX account, security principal, and so on. So those auxiliary classes contain a set of attributes what Microsoft decided to attach to a user, but they decided that they are better off in their own class and then being attached to a user instead of putting them right into the user. And this possible superiors here is pretty interesting too, because it's configuring where a user object may reside. So usually I'm not talking about rights here, I'm talking about Active Directory, about the LDAP service here. And here we have a definition that a user might be right underneath the domain object, or that he might be, for example, right underneath an organizational unit. So he can be in one of those containers here. And on the next step, we have the attributes. And the mandatory here is actually the must contain field in Active Directory. So we don't have anything here. But as you know, for example, when you create a user, he needs to have a name. But this is configured in some other class. For example, the top class is defining that everything which is inheriting from the top class needs to have a name. And one example also is description, which is in the optional field of the top class. And so every object in Active Directory can have a description. At Tech@US, I had a customer who was asking me if it would be possible to have a description field on DNS entries. And actually, if you look in Active Directory, that's possible, but it's not exposed to the DNS management console. But since the DNS node object is also inheriting from top, it's allowed to have a description. So you would be actually able to create your own little management interface and to put description in DNS node objects. And the user has a lot of additional attributes which are configured here. Another tab here is what I'm not going into too deep into this talk, but I've done it actually last year at the at IT Forum in my security delegation session. Is this default security tab, where we define what's the default security for each user we create in our company. For example, we have the authenticated, not authenticated, we have the account operators. They are supposed to be somewhere here. Here they are. And if we would look closely in the security description of account operators, they will get full control over users, groups, computers, and so on. Especially when we look in the OU here in the default security rights. So this is actually defining what the implicit security looks like on an object we create from this instance here. So lots of interesting things in here. So that's a class. Let's just look at some attribute. Perhaps some account name. So here we have an attribute. And let's look at the properties of the attribute. That's actually fairly easy. We have a name here. We have an OID again. Then we have the syntax of the attribute. Here it's Unicode string, so it can contain foreign characters. Has a minimum and maximum length configured, which would be changeable. No, are they not? I think they are changeable, but via other mechanisms. And very important here is that that this attribute is indexed, for example. So searching against same account name is a good thing because it's indexed. If you perform Active Directory searches only against attributes which are not indexed, then the domain controller has to calculate a lot, and those queries are getting expensive. In Windows Server 2008, you actually get the possibility in Server Manager to go down to run reports, and those reports are telling you if you have, there's an Active Directory report, and if you run this one, it's telling you if you have extensive search operations there, how long the CPU took, if it was able to answer this question from cache and stuff like this. We also have the ambiguous name resolution field here, so we would be able to add and remove here same account name from the ambiguous name resolution, and if it's replicated to the global catalog and so on. Okay, so we have, when we add attributes to existing object, we have the possibility, as we've just seen in the mandatory field and in the optional field, we have the possibility to add attributes directly to user objects, for example. We can also collect them in one of the auxiliary classes. And actually, I think best practice here is if you want to extend your user account, for example, collect your own attributes in your own auxiliary class and then attach this auxiliary class to the user. And the dynamic auxiliary classes, what I mentioned earlier, are in Windows Server 2003. And what you are doing there actually is that you also create an auxiliary class, and then you put this auxiliary class in the object category, no, object class field. So for example, if you want to convert a user into an INET person, you are simply adding the auxiliary class INET person to the user object's object class. Let's do this real quick. So I have this demo thing here. Let's quickly do. I have one notepad. I have one file here, shoe size LDIF, what I prepared for extending the schema with the attribute shoe size. And we see here I was using the prefix which was formerly registered to me, said, not there anymore. Nobody can look it up anymore. And I want to use the OID, what I generated here earlier. So let's simply mark this one and copy it because for some reason I can't remember those long numbers by heart. Okay, this is the base OID, the root OID, but we want to create an attribute schema here. So I want to do an attribute, and I earlier said that attributes should be .2, and this is my first attribute, so I make it .2.1 here. So that's the OID for the attribute. OM syntax and attribute syntax, you can look up those values on MSDN. They define if it's case insensitive or sensitive string, integer, what format the data is in there. Range lower, range upper is the size, minimum and maximum size. Is single valued would describe if we have a multi-value attribute which can contain multiple values like a group member, or if it's just a single attribute. And we have a description here. So shoe size is, I think it's one of the most common examples for extending your schema, which is most likely not used in your corporation. One thing we are doing very often is actually cost center. I'm not sure if it also applies to your country, but in Germany, cost center is a very important field within companies. So actually, when we do migrations, there are a couple requests always from customer to extend the cost center information in the Active Directory. And I actually think it's quite handy. In our corporation, we have the same thing. And when I'm working against some other department, I have to fill out some forms with their cost center. And for me, since I know a little bit about Active Directory, it's more easy to figure out the cost center by performing a one-line query against Active Directory than to find any corporate directory where I might be able to figure out what cost center this user belongs to. Okay, we have here additional, we have our own class, what I called USWC user, and this is our auxiliary class, and we also need to put our OID in here. Let me paste, and this is class, so we are making it 1.1 here. And another thing is that I want to configure this class that it contains the attribute shoe size, what we just created a couple lines above. And so it should contain the OID 2.1, which was the OID what we just assigned here to the shoe size class, attribute, sorry. And then we're doing a schema update now. At this point, I'm not configuring this user here. I'm not configuring this auxiliary class to the user object. I'm doing because I want to do something else in a moment. So let's save here and let's use ldfde. And we want to perform an import, and we want to perform it from a file, and the file should be shoe size ldif. So quite simple. Ding, ding, ding. 4 entries modified successfully. Yeah, 2 entries, but plus 2 update operations. Let's go back into the schema. And now let's just here simply click reload schema. Those things might take some time. It might be that the schema is cached somewhere or whatever. Those things might need some time. I hope that we get them right away here. So let's just see. Oh, we already got it here now. USW shoe size is a numerical string, active, and it shouldn't be indexed and other things because I didn't say anything here. So this is our new default. We got the minimum and maximum size here, And as I said, we are able to change this. Yeah, with the user, we weren't able to change it with default things in Active Directory, but with custom extensions, we are able to exchange it here. So the shoe size is very unnecessary, but we still want to apply it to a user here. And we didn't do this yet. We have our auxiliary class here as well, USWC user. And if I look here in the auxiliary class, I see that it attributes that it contains optional the USWC shoe size. And this is not applied to somewhere. So if I would go after a user and look to configure his shoe size there, let's open up Active Directory users and computers, or DSA MSC. I'm still using the command line to start those. I'm still hoping on those 10,000 from Mark Minasi. And let's refresh here. And we have a demo user here, Joe Doe, properties. And that's very neat actually here, because we have an attribute editor in Active Directory users and computers of Windows Server 2008. So we don't have to write our own administrative interfaces this much anymore. And I want to see the USW shoe size. And there's no such thing. User, USN, there's no USW shoe size, because we didn't apply it yet. We didn't put it to the default user class, and we didn't use dynamic auxiliary objects. So what I can do now, I'm looking for object category and object class. Okay. And let's do it again. Object class, edit this one, and I want to add a value, and the value is USWC minus user. That's my auxiliary class I defined earlier, and this should only apply to Joe now. So that's a demo for the dynamic auxiliary class here. Okay, apply. Let's refresh the user. Look in there, properties. Keep my fingers crossed. Where did it go? Here's Joe Doe. USWC shoe size. So Joe, I'm not now able to configure a shoe size here for Joe. He's having size 42. Okay, it might be that it needs to replicate for a moment, but I would be able actually, as I said, those things take a moment. I would be able to change the shoe size here only of Joe, but other users, like if I'm looking at, we have other users somewhere, like Frankfurt, there's a colleague of mine, properties, and attribute editor. And let's look after USWC shoe size. It's not here, it's missing. So we just extended this auxiliary class to the one user object Joe. So that's pretty neat, and that's new in Windows Server 2003, while this attribute editor here is new in Windows Server 2008. So that's actually how we are doing it. This would be to extend all users with my user, and I have an attribute list here. I put those attribute lists into the my contain field of my user, and I put the my user auxiliary class into the auxiliary class value of the structural class of the user here. So all users are being extended with those if we want to do it for all users, or on the other hand, I would be able to put it in the object class, and then I just have the extension for a couple of users. Okay, let's talk a quick moment about extending versus configuring your schema. So this is actually a definition I made up, and I hope that's okay. Extending the schema, in my eyes, is adding new attributes and classes, filling values in there, and actually filling values when I'm extending my schemas, which can't be changed. And also extending the schema if it has an effect on the global catalog. So if I'm touching the partial attribute set configuration in Windows 2000, we are getting a full replication of everything in the schema. So that's kind of dangerous, and that's where the customer fears, especially back in the Windows 2000 timeframe, are coming from. However, we also have values in there For example, we've seen the minimum size and maximum size were changeable, or there are search flags. I can select if something is being indexed or if it's not indexed. I can select whether something is contained in a tombstone or if it's not. And those are changes which I can reverse. So I refer to those things as configuring the schema. And those also, if I don't touch the partial attribute set, then they won't do a full partial attribute set replication. Okay. And so configuring the schema is okay because I can reverse it. Issues we have when we extend the schema are registration. I was talking a lot about these. Changing link IDs, MAPI IDs. That's an issue because I simply can't do it. There would be a way to do it, but there's no supported way to change link IDs or MAPI IDs. And the only thing you can do is that you mark objects, what you're added to your schema. You can mark them as defunct so that they are not used anymore. But you cannot remove them from Active Directory. You can exchange certain values when they are kind of deactivated, defunct, but you can't remove them. So it's impossible to remove a schema object. So what I've seen at customers is that there are a lot of fears of schema extensions, and I told you before that our management is not better here. They are also scared about schema extensions, and that's correct if you don't do it right. But actually writing in the schema partition is not a bad thing, because you have to worry about what changes do you want to write in there. As I said, changes what you can reverse. I don't care if I can reverse them, if they don't invoke any replication issues there was my cooperation. And this was a really bad thing in Windows 2000 timeframe, because we had customers who were scared that their replication, when they extend the schema, will take more than a weekend, and so that it will influence network speed after the weekend. But if you don't touch the partial attribute set, or if you touch the partial attribute set, but you have a majority of domain controllers, at least the replication partners across the slow links, running on Windows Server 2003, you don't have any issues with it. So I don't think that extending the schema is a bad thing if you do it the right way. The worst example I've seen for a customer of customer fears because of extending the schema was what Microsoft was doing with Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 1. What they did there is that they have decided that it's a good idea to maintain the SID history in a deleted object in a tombstone. Because if I want to reanimate a tombstone, I always want the security identifiers back. I can write the other things back, as you might have seen in my session 2 days ago, but you can't write or you can't get the SID back, and the SID history, you would be able to write it back, but it's kind of very complicated thing to do. And additionally, you might not even know what the previous SID history of the user was if you got rid of the domain which contained those SIDs, but you might still have some security rights which are using them. So Microsoft decided it's a good idea to keep the SID history in the tombstone, what I also agree on. But actually, as I said before, we have search flags in schema, and search flags, there's a bit in search flags, I think it's bit number 3, yeah, it's bit number 3, which is if this is set to 1, then this data is maintained in the tombstone. So actually, the best design would have been to just set bit number 3 when updating to Service Pack 1, that they are writing in the schema partition that bit number 3 of the user object should, in search flags of the SID history, should be set. However, the developers at Microsoft have decided at this point that it's a bad idea to write into the schema partition using a service pack, because they were scared that customer will not implement their service pack because there's some write operation in the schema edition, in the schema partition. However, this write there wouldn't have caused a partial attribute set replication. It would have been reversible. So I don't see any issues with it. But instead of writing there, Microsoft has decided, simply so that customers are rolling out the service pack, which contains a lot of other useful things, they have decided not to put it in the search flags attribute, where it would have been the proper place. They were putting it in code. So now it's nailed in stone in the code. Whenever you're deleting an object, and you are running against a Windows Server 2003 SP1, then the object is maintaining SID history there. Even if you can configure in search flags whatever you like to in SID history, this wouldn't change anything. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left here. So evaluating, testing, and rolling out. Test your schema extensions before you roll them out. Use a development forest, make sure that everything is registered, take care of your applications, that they are able to work against it. Use LDIF files or code to update the schema, and use the same LDIF files or same code to update the schema wherever you want to update it. Make sure that you're not doing any mistakes. Don't use the GUI here and click in production, use the schema management GUI and click in there and make a type error, hit OK accidentally, and then you have something in the schema what you might not be able to change. Use LDIF files here, what you review, what you're testing, whatever. And have rollback procedures in place. It's always necessary to have a rollback procedure usually. Schema updates, if they are done right, for example, the base Microsoft schema updates, they are tested very, very well. However, I would never do a schema update without having rollback procedures in place. And rollback procedures actually means that you have to prepare a forest recovery, because you can't roll back schema changes. You can't simply restore a domain controller from an older state and then hope that the schema and mark those schema changes as authoritative. That's not possible. The only way to roll back a schema extension is that you're recovering your forest to an older state of your Active Directory. And there are a couple things here. Depends on your likings, what you're implementing. In the past, there was a suggestion to use an island schema master, that you take the schema master out of production, that you provide it with a network link so that the network interface is still happy, but it doesn't have any physical connection to your production network. Perform the updates on the schema master, verify the updates there, that they are okay, and then bring it back into production and let it replicate. Another possibility would be to just disable replication on this one. You can, with repadmin, there's a switch where you can disable replication, and that you just disable replication on the schema master. However, Microsoft is recently recommending that you, or they have seen issues that a schema update is not validated unless you were updating multiple domain controllers and the schema change was replicating. So there's actually another suggestion here, that you use an island recovery DC, or as in the picture above, a lag site, what I covered 2 days ago, might also help you, that you have one site which is only recovering like once a week, and then you would be able to recover from this older state of your Active Directory. But use some, make backups of every domain, have one domain controller per domain offline if you want to. Use this island recovery DC during your schema extension. I've actually had a customer recently who told me that they did a schema extension, and they were following the recommendation of the island recovery DC, which is a very good thing. The other thing is that they didn't check that this DC isn't used by any application. They were unable to, and they figured out that this DC was used by an application. And so they had some issues there during the offline times of the schema update. And so I would actually recommend introduce, if you are not sure that no application is running against this DC, then just have just install a new DC, use virtualization technologies to get one DC per domain up and running, let it replicate for a week or something, then take those offline during your schema update, perform your schema update, let it replicate, perform your tested schema update, what you're secure in theory that it will work, and put it in there, let it replicate, and when you're sure that your schema update worked, then you can put those DCs either back online, or you can put them back online, demote them, or you take them offline and perform a metadata cleanup so that they are out of Active Directory. Always be aware that a schema update which is faulty, or if you want to roll back from it, is a forest recovery, and forest recovery is a kind of costly operation. So make sure that you're testing everything. Okay, another thing is here administering your custom extension. You know, I said earlier that employee ID is already in Active Directory, but in the past you didn't have an interface to administer it unless you were using etc edit, ADSI edit, because this is exposing you all attributes. So companies who wanted to configure the employee ID were challenged to provide their help desk with Active Directory users and computers to create users, to manage groups, whatever, plus ADSI edit, which is kind of mostly above the skill level of a regular help desk admin. So sometimes not, but depends on who's doing the administration of your users out there. So etc edit is not the best interface you want to give to them. And sometimes they are even providing DSA or Active Directory users and computers via terminal services, and then they have two different interfaces where they have to switch back and forth. So that's not the best idea. You would be able to extend property pages. That's actually covered on MSDN. There's code out there, there are code examples. However, this requires some solid C++ knowledge. I don't have it. Probably your developers might have it, but this requires some more knowledge. Some companies have done it. You are able to extend the property pages of your user property or any of them, and you're also able to create your own pages for adding and removing user accounts. For example, Exchange 2000 and 2003 was extending those interfaces. So whenever you were creating new user and Active Directory users and computers, it was also giving you the Exchange properties there. So that's an example what's done there. What you also can do is extending the context menu, and I want to show this to you for a second because that's actually quite interesting, but let me finish the slide first. One other thing we have to do is care for delegation. For example, you might want to let your help desk allow to update certain attributes. For example, you have a cost center, and the cost center should be updated by the help desk or telephone numbers or something. You have to allow delegation there. And if you have custom attributes, what they should be allowed to update, then you have to check in your code for allowed attributes effective, because if you do a allowed attributes effective search against the user account in question, you're getting back all the attributes what this specific user has write access to. Let me show this to you for a second. So what I want to do first is, we don't need the schema console anymore. Nope. Okay, I want to, the first thing I want to do is that I configure the context menu. For example, I have here this in Barcelona, I have my Joe user. This is the standard context menu. However, I want to extend this, and this is very easily, and each of you is able to do this. It's very easy to do this because I'm just going into Active Directory and etc edit. I'm looking for the display specifiers here. Then I'm looking for my language code. 409 is US English, 407 would be German. And here I have the cn equals user. Let's just go down. Here we have cn equals user display, and what we have here is the admin context menu. There's already an extension in here, and this would be a C++ written regular extension here, because it's just stating a GUID. But what I also can do is that I say here, okay, I want to say, or let's call it Ulf's properties, comma, and then I have a small little application what I wrote, scheme.exe. I have a small application here. It's called schema extension.exe. It's coming up with its own window. It's taking care of those allowed attributes effective things, and I want to extend this into the properties of my user. So I'm simply hitting OK, closing the interface here. I know it won't work with a refresh of the interface, so I need to open up Active Directory users and computers again. Joe, right mouse click, Ulf properties, they are here. Takes a moment. First start of the thing. And this is actually my additional properties, what I configured. And I just simply configured here to show the name and the account name of the user. And I have some additional attributes what I was already putting in there, and they are displayed here, and I can change them. And since it's my own application, I can also check that the syntax is valid, stuff like this. So if I'm exchanging those here, okay, I configured my application that it's telling me which attribute will be updated with which value. Yes, and the user is changed, so that's fairly easy. However, using Windows Server 2003, I don't have to do this, but let me show this first for delegated users, because I said it's important to query allowed attributes effective. So I'm starting now Active Directory users and computers with a different account. Now I'm starting it as Ulf. Go right mouse click, properties, and I see that this is grayed out versus when I was logging on as admin, everything was available. Let's go into Ulf properties again. And here I see that this user got delegated rights to update branch, office, and department number, so he's able to change those two fields. And I simply did this by querying against allowed attributes effective when I started this application. This application got two parameters from the context menu. First one was the distinguished name of the user, and the second one was the type of the object. So I simply take those into there, get the object, check allowed attributes effective, and select which fields here to enable or disable. And now I would be able to change those here. Okay, will be changed to 123. Okay, it's working. In Windows Server 2008, I have a different possibility. The attribute editor, what I showed you earlier, and I really like this developer who did this thing. Actually, it's the same guy who did the Active Directory snapshots, what I showed earlier. And at one weekend, my wife was very mad at me and told me that I shouldn't mention his name anymore, because I told her so many times how great he is, that he provided us with those great features like 80 snapshots. He also provided us with a field here that we can say that we only want to see writable attributes, and you can configure this in the registry as default. And now I just get the location, I just get those two attributes, what I delegated to my users, because what he's doing here in the background is that he's also querying allowed attributes effective and only providing me the values, what I'm able to update. Okay, I have to finish my presentation here because they are getting mad at me probably if I'm running too late. So let me run through the best practices real quick. And you have them actually in your in the handouts. The presentation is already available. So there's this feature of auto link ID. You can automatically create link IDs by just using the code like here. You say that in your custom extension, you say the forward link should be this number, and then you configure the backward link to be the number of the forward link, and it's automatically assigning you a link ID field, link ID pair, which is not used by any other application right now. So check your applications that they are using as forward link, not a real number, but this OID, and then you get it right. Another thing is that in MAPI ID, we get exactly the same mechanism here, and we are able to automatically assign MAPI IDs now in Windows Server 2008. So if you don't need MAPI IDs today, I recommend you look at this feature here, wait until you got Windows Server 2008, and then implement your schema updates, and check for your third-party vendors that they are doing the same thing. Here's the GUID for the auto MAPI ID. Document your schema. There are tools out there. There's a schema analyzer available at Microsoft. There's LDIF.de, what is just providing you with a text dump. And Dean Wells has written a tool, schemadiff.cmd, which is telling you about the schema updates you did since you created the forest. You can simply run this, and I have the link here in the resources. So the summary: plan your schema extensions carefully. Verify even third-party schema extensions. They are a time bomb if they are not done correctly, because they might prevent you from future updates. And plan for administration and delegation also by querying allowed attributes effective. And there's no need to fear about schema updates, because if you do them right, you're on the safe side. So thank you. Here are a couple of resources. Please don't forget to fill in your feedback. I'm sorry that I again don't have time for any question, but in half an hour, me and Stephanie Chung from the product group will have a Shark Talk and about Active Directory in Windows Server 2008. So you can come also there and ask me questions before or after or during the Shark Talk. Interactive session, sorry, they are called interactive session this year. So come over there, ask your question about Active Directory. We had a lot of fun yesterday when we did it. I think we will have lots of interesting questions there today again. Please fill in your feedback, and thank you for attending the session.